Do a review Likutei Sichos in Chelik Chavav. This is the second Sicha for Parshas Tetzaveh. The Rebbe discusses an interesting question. Sometimes we have evidence, seemingly very clear evidence that we saw that challenges a ruling of the Chachamim. In this case, we're talking about how you write the words on the engraved the words on the tzitz that the Kohen Gadol was wearing on his forehead. It had the words Kodesh LaHashem. The question is, the Chachamim say that it's done in two lines. That on the top you have the word Hashem Yud Kei Vav Kei, and in the bottom line, you have the word Kodesh Lamed. It would be together Kodesh Le Hashem. And that's the opinion of the Chachamim. And yet comes Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yosi, he says, I actually saw the Tzitz in Rome, and over there was written in one line. So did the rabbis change their position? He said, I saw it. I saw it in Rome. The Rebbe is going to point out that even though they saw it in Rome, doesn't necessarily mean, as the Rebbe explains the Meiri, doesn't necessarily mean that the Rabbanon were wrong. They still continue to hold their position. And the Rebbe brings this, a lot of times people may be inclined to change. Oh, we've seen it differently, so maybe that changes how the menorah looked. You know, the Rebbe clearly stated from the Rambam that the branches came up in an angle straight. They weren't semicircular, as many of the menorahs are depicted over there in the wall of Titus over there in the Shara Nitzochen, as the Rebbe will speak. But the fact that you've seen it doesn't prove. The Rebbe is going to show you different ways how to explain that you saw it, but it doesn't really mean that this was the original and this is what it was, as the Rebbe will continue to. We'll go step by step. But the Rebbe learns from this that never get too worried if you see something, oh, maybe this conflicts, with what our tradition. No, there's always an explanation. The Rebbe goes through this. So let's learn the Sichos step by step. Tetzaveh base, Aleph. In the Tzivui of Osisias Hatzitz, on the instruction in the parsha about making the tzitz, that plate, steht in Posik, it says in the verse, Upitachta olav pituchei chosam, so that you should engrave on it the engravement of chosam, and the words would be Kodesh LaHashem. Those are engraved, the words Kodesh LaHashem are engraved on the tzitz. As oifun tzitz zomen oiskritzen the Wörter Kodesh LaHashem, that on the tzitz they should engrave the words Kodesh LaHashem. How were these words engraved? In dem oifun wie die zwei Wörter seine gewen Kosovolov, in the way that these two words were written on the tzitz. Is Farana Plukta, there is a disagreement zwischen the Chachamim mit Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yosi, between the Chachamim and Elazar and Rabbi Yosi. The Chachamim halten, the Chachamim's view is as Kosov Olav the Beis Shitin. It was written in two lines. You had the Yud K on the top, which is the Yud K Vav K, the Yud K Lemailo, the Kodesh Lamed Lamata, Kodesh Le, with the Lamed was on this a lower line. Yud K Vav K calls it a Yud K, but is on the top line. And in this bottom and lower line is Kodesh Le. Hashem Sholem, the Rebbe quotes from the Rashi, Hashem Sholem B'Shita Elyono. The full name of Hashem Yudki Vavki on the first line. The Kodesh Lamed B'Shita Tachtoina, and Kodesh with a Lamed on the lower line. That's the opinion of the Chacham. Oh, but Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yesi Zok, but Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yesi says, Ani Ra'isi Be'ir Raimi. I was in Rome, and Rome was the place where they took all the kelim and the garments of the Beis Hamikdash when they exiled the Jewish people. So Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yesi testifies. He says, I saw in the city of Rome the Kosuv Olav. It was written on it, Kodesh LaHashem B'Shita Achas. It was in one line. Kodesh LaHashem was on one line. It wasn't two lines. So he disagrees. So what happens with the halacha? Usually the halacha is like the chachamim, but in this case, even though Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yosef is one against the chacham, against the rabbim, but he's not just giving an opinion; he's saying what he saw. How do we deal with this? So let's see what the Rebbe brings down now. What the Rambam rules in this case. So the Rambam paskin, the Rambam rules the kosav olav shnei shita. You write on the Tzitz, you write two lines. That is the opinion of the Chachamim, as we'll see. However, the Rambam says, "V'im kosvei b'shita achas kosher." If you wrote it in one line, it's still kosher because we can't negate a testimony. That's the way it was written. So, upa'amim kosvu b'shita achas. He says, if you write it in one line, b'di'evet it's kosher. Well, the halacha lechatchila is like the chachomim, but b'di'evet is kosher. And Rambam adds, upa'amim kosvu b'shita achas. Sometimes they did write it in one line. And the Rambam is referring to the fact that Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yosef saw it over there, as the Kesef Mishnah explains, as we'll see in the Mishnah, that because Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yosef testified, so while the halacha should go like the Chachamim, but b'di'evet it's going to be kosher, and it was done that way sometime. The fun is verstandig, so here we understand. So maybe you would think, since Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yosef, even though he was an individual, but since his reasoning was he saw it that way, that should have more power and more convincing than the Chachamim, because he says they're wrong. I saw it this way. But the fact that the Rambam rules like the Chacham and only b'di'evet, he says, is it okay? Or sometimes they did it that way, but that's not the right way. That means that the Chachamim did not concede and say, no, that's the way to write it, because that's why lechatchila the Rambam paskons like the Chachamim. Therefore, is verstandig. So from this we understand. As nit kokendik of a duse shel Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yosef, notwithstanding the testimony of Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yosef, haben die Chachamim nit charota from Zeir Dei. The Chachamim do not retract their opinion as kosov olav b'beis shitim, that you have to write in two lines. There's a testimony. Okay, so but the evidence like that, but the Chachamim are still in their opinion. That only Rambam only compromises. Okay, so la halacha, if you did it that way, it's not going to be possible because we see a fact that it was done that way. So basically, we see that the Rambam's view is he does accept the testimony of Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yosef, but only to the fact that would be okay. B'di'evet will have to paskin like Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yosef, but it still remains lechatchila. The halacha remains like the Chachamim, and the Rebbe explains now. The far paskin der Rambam v'di Chachamim. The Rambam Pascal like the Chacham, you have to write in 2 lines that as is not as b'di'evet miyah halacha ki Rabbi Elazar b'Rabbi Yossi. B'di'evet, if you make it in such a way, the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar b'Rabbi Yossi b'di'evet, that it's not going to be possible because v'haraya we saw the tzitz. V'zeu shekoisev harambam, and this is what the Rambam writes, v'pa'omim kosvuhu b'shita achas. He says they wrote it sometimes in 1 line. Meaning there meet the edus for Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi. He means the testimony. Sometimes the Rambam said they wrote this was the testimony of Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi that he saw it. So sometimes was mahai edus is mochrech zu sagen, and because of this testimony, we have to say as b'di'eved is kosher oich b'shita achas. That b'di'eved it's also kosher b'shita achas. So, all in all, what it really means is that we're not ignoring the testimony of Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi, but we have to accept that because he says that he saw the fact. So we are accepting his testimony. Yes, we paskin like the Chacham and Lechatchila, but b'di'evet, and we see that this is what happened and this is what we did. But we'll see in the Meiri seems to say that no, we don't accept at all what Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi said, notwithstanding that Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi is a Tana from the great Tanoim. It doesn't matter. The Chachamim are the majority. We deal with the majority. And here is the issue. Well, how could you ignore, how could the Meiri say that we're ignoring what Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi saw because the Chachamim, the majority, how could you possibly ignore when there was a clear testimony? He saw it. How are you going to argue with what he saw? He saw the tzitz and he saw the way it was written. So the Rambam accepts that, as the Rambam rules that b'di'evet it's okay, like the Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi. The Meiri says no. Let's look inside. The Meiri is mevayer v'zel l'shoynei. The Meiri explains. This is what he says. Even though from the great sages testified, Anira isiv beremi v'kosuv olov. Kodesh Lashem B'Shita Achas. I saw the Tzitz in Rome, and over there it was written Kodesh Lashem in 1 line. Lo yikchishu es hayedua etzlom ab be'edus riyah. That did not contradict what they knew. They knew it was in 2 lines, and this did not contradict, even though it was a testimony of what they saw. So we're going against that. Meiri says it doesn't matter that they saw it one way, that Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi saw it. It doesn't matter. Still, the Chachamim ruled that it was that is 2 lines, and that's the way it remains. So first, the Rebbe is going to explain now, problematic, but how could you deny what he has seen and ignore it and paskin like the Chachamim? And then the Rebbe goes on to explain that what he saw may have not been the actual tzitz and it did not really contradict. But then the Rebbe is going to want to know, so how come the Rambam takes in the Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi? This is going to be the discussion. Let's look inside. But first the Rebbe asks, how could the Meiri say that we're going to ignore what Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi saw if he's testifying, a sage like Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi? How could we ignore that? Is l'chayre tomua. So this seems to be a little surprising. We're discussing here a testimony that one of the great sages saw. He's testifying what he saw. For Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yasi, Rabbi Yasi, so sees welches is nicht Sofik. There could be no doubt, God forbid. We're not questioning Rabbi Elazar Yasi. Maybe he didn't see, maybe he's making it up, maybe he doesn't know. God forbid. He saw it, we believe that he saw that. So the question is, how could we ignore that? So that's the question on the Meiri. How could he say ruling remains like the Chachamim and we don't take Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yasi? Now, of course, the Rambam does take it into consideration because the Rambam paskins that Bidi Evet, we paskin like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yasi because the fact is that he saw it that way. But we also have a problem according to the Rambam, because even the Rambam says that the halacha is like the Chachamim, really. So how could we have a tzitz that Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yosef saw done in a b'di'evadik way? That seems a little bit difficult to understand that they were making a tzitz, which b'di'evad is kosher, but the Rambam paskins that is like the Chachamim, you need it in two lines. And b'di'evad is, how would he see a tzitz in what he actually saw? You're saying, but if he saw that, and that's the reason why we paskin that it's okay, but it's not l'chatchila, why would they have a tzitz which is only okay and not l'chatchila? Bafilu lifi psak Rambam. And even according to the Rambam, Leighton Peter Chanal, as we explained before, that he does take into consideration what Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yasi saw, and that's why with the evidence it'll be okay. So it turns out, as avodas Kohen Gadol Yenayon, that the service of the Kohen Gadol in those years, once they captured the begodim, the kelim and the begodim from the Kohen Gadol by the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, and those was hatzitz mechaper afilu b'shegeg afilu kshe'ena al mitzvah. We know further that the tzitz will atone even when the tzitz is not on the head of the Kohen Gadol. So that means during the service of the Kohen Gadol, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a service because the tzitz is mechaper even when it's not on. Tzitz itself, there's the beged, the tzitz is mechaper, is given mit abediyavet tzitz. It was an okeya after the fact tzitz, which is only kosher b'diyavet after the fact. And this would not even be b'diyavet, would mean normally after the fact it's done, but here they should have created another tzitz which meets the standard of lechatchila. And exactly at that moment when they had this b'di'evet tzitz that was captured, there is something which points to the fact that we have to say, even the way that Rambam says, that what Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi wasn't necessarily the real tzitz, because if it was the real tzitz, we don't understand how could you ignore the testimony of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi. We have to say that according to the Chachamim, it wasn't the real tzitz, because if it was the real tzitz, how could the Meiri say that we're ignoring Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi? He saw that. How do you explain that? And we also don't understand how would they have a b'di'evet tzitz, as the Rebbe is asking now, even according to the Rambam. So b'di'evet, if you're saying, okay, it was after the fact, for some reason they made it that way. But b'di'evet b'kiyotzu, in such a case, what does it mean after the fact? Is shaykh zu zogun Nur auf der Zeit, was darf nehmen zu euch kritzen euch auf a Tas shel Zov. It's only for the time that it would take, that it needs to take to engrave on a golden uh, plate, on a golden tas, the zwei Wörter Kodesh LaHashem. So for that period of time, they had to use it as one. They couldn't make it, but can't say after the fact. After the fact is only for a short period of time because you have to redo it. And according to the above, he saw it. It turns out as b'toich zman zeh is nilkad Beis Hamikdash. That in the middle of that time, the Beis Hamikdash was captured. They destroyed the Beis Hamikdash and they conquered, and they took the Menilka Tzitz. The Tzitz was taken during that small period of time because B'diavad here wouldn't work for a long time. Just what it takes them to redo it. And here, since he found it that way, it was meaning that it is very difficult to understand. The Rebbe's issue is, how could we say, if we should say that he actually saw the tzitz without any, no doubt, this is what he actually saw. So first of all, how could we ignore his testimony from Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi, according to the Meiri, and even according to the Rambam that takes it in consideration, but the Rambam it's only b'diavad. And why would they use a b'diavad to get tzitz over there? And this doesn't even qualify for b'diavad, only for a small period of time. And we have to say at that particular time when they didn't have a chance yet to make the new tzitz, that's exactly when it was conquered, and that was in Rome what they found over there. And the Rebbe explains this by explaining really what they saw wasn't really the original tzitz. Someone could have made a copy of the tzitz, and that wasn't the tzitz of the Kohen Gadol. So why does Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi accept that? It's just a matter of how far do you want to go by saying that what you've seen is not the real thing, that according to the Chachamim, they say this was their tradition, how the tzitz was. So in their mind, they did not have to say that this was the real tzitz. But according to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi, by his tradition, it wasn't like the Chachamim said in two lines. So he took it for face value, as the Rebbe will explain. But the Rebbe first brings in, we have another case which the Rebbe has discussed on the wall of Titus over there, in the victory wall of Titus, they have a description of the menorah, and some people argue, well, that means that that's the way the menorah is written. And the Rebbe says, no. That even though they were bragging that this was from the Kalim of the menorah from the Beis Hamikdash, but that doesn't mean that that was the case. Let's look inside. Beis. But man das verstehen will understand this von an ähnlichen Inge, something similar. Wegen welchem hat schon einmal gerät, welchem hat schon gerät, einmal Baruch, which was already discussed at length. Auf dem Schar ha-Nitzochen, was man hat gebeut in Räum. On that gate, in the victory of the wall of Titus, in which they built in Rome, for Titus Yemach Shemoi, may his name be erased, Titus. They made this wall of victory. Noch sein Nitzochen of Yerushalayim, after he was victorious over Jerusalem, of Yerushalayim, is do an ausgekritzte Ziur von a Menorah. There is an engraved shape of a menorah. But yeshnom ha'omrim, there are those that say, ados is der tziyur from the menorah in Beis Hamikdash, that this was the shape of the menorah of the Beis Hamikdash, that he put it in as his nitzochen. Is the menorah dort mitzuyer ba'ofen, the menorah over there is designed in a way as the shisha knei ha-menorah, the 6 branches of the menorah, ziehen sich aroif, they stretch above from the middle branch, v'chatzoi keshes, half kailavdik, they're half circular, a half circular branches, and not a straight angle, but a circular upward. This is a picture. This is a design. So so it would seem Rashi zogt beferish. Rashi says very clearly as the kane hamenoira zainen balachsen. In Rashi, it says, which was the source that the Rebbe argued, and from the Rambam, but Rashi says they were balachsen in an angle. They didn't go half circular, but they went up in an angle. Nimshochim va'olim, balachsen nimshochim va'olim. In an angle, they were extended going up. Was meint, as sich gezeugen in a gleichen Shipur, which means that they were stretched in a straight tilt. They were going up in an angle, in a straight angle. Was das is doch der Abteich von Kona. This means a branch. When you say it's referred to, these branches are referred to a stick, a kone. What is a kone stick, both in the written and the oral Torah? A gleicher semach. It is a straight growth. The mezetes als vasai kol yoer. You see it on the edge of every river. No circle. It doesn't grow in a circular way. It grows. It's a straight. Punkt azoi seinen die Knei haben neue ausgemalt geworden, and exactly like that, these were designed as they were designed by the Rambam from Rambam. Vimizetes in dem Ziur haben neue shebegzuf kuf ksaf yad koche. You see it in the drawing of the menorah, which is in the actually holy handwriting of the Rambam. The Rambam himself made that sketch of the menorah. Wie Rebbe Avram ben Rambam, as Avram, the son of the Rambam, is made, he testifies as those was Aviv hat mitzayring when the Knei ha-menorah b'yoshev, that the fact that his father, the Rambam, designed the branches of the menorah straight, loy be'igul, not in a circular, is given by Kavona. That was intentional. It wasn't just that the Rambam happened to draw it that way, but this drawing was exactly what the Rambam had in mind, because that's the way the Rambam saw the meaning of Knei HaMenorah, that they wore in an angle like a konet. So this seems to be challenged by the fact, look, and the wall of Titus, in the Shar HaNitzochen over there, it's semicircular. Stimmt es doch nicht mit der Ziur HaMenorah shal Shar HaNal, so that doesn't seem to fit to the design of the menorah, which was on the gate of above. Was is l'chayra an inyan von Eidus Riyah? That should be a testimony. But we see that it's not. So how could we say otherwise? So this was challenged to the Rebbe when the Rebbe says that these, according to the Rambam and Rashi, it's a straight angle. So the Rebbe explains that that's not really a challenge. Who says that this is the exact shape of the menorah? The Rebbe continues. The Rebbe says the explanation. Very simply, this doesn't really conflict to what the Rambam and Rashi say. The ois gekritzte menorah von Shar, this engraved menorah that they had on the gate, is not the richtige Ziel von der menorah shebemikdash. That's not the correct design of, or the shape of the menorah that was the mikdash. Wie mir seht dort in dem Ziur, actually you see in that design, noch kama v'kama protim. There's many other details besides the fact that it's circular and not straight. See other details, welche stimmen nicht mit Tachnis, Tamnis, HaMenorah Mikdash, which do not agree, they not fit the way we know the image of the menorah that was in the Mikdash. Biz as in der menorah sha'al hashar is mitzura tzurus darkoin. It's like a dragon shape on the menorah, which is a symbol of their Avodah Zarah. They put that in too. That for sure wasn't in the shape of the menorah, and that's over there too. So therefore, mistabe the farsazog. That's why it is logical to therefore say Asiur ha-menorah shalashar, that this design, the shape of the menorah on the gate, hotmem melachatchilen nit noch gemacht to beginning, that was not an imitation the menorah shebemigdash. They did not copy the menorah of the Mikdash. Not an other menorah. This is a different menorah. Was hat gehad gewisse Ähnlichkeiten zu the menorah shebemigdash. It had some similarities to the menorah in the Mikdash. So why would they copy and not the right thing? Because the menorah, the basic Mikdash, was important to them. So they had some of the parts of the menorah of the Mikdash in their design. The menorah Shebe Mikdash. Hodgad Gora Groise Chashivas, the menorah, the Mikdash had a very great importance. Fleckten and Machen menorahs, they used to make the menorahs mit an ähnlichen Oizen, that it should seem similarly the menorah Shebe Mikdash to the menorah in the Mikdash. So they made it look a little bit like, but it's not. So what kind of question is that? It's on the Titus, it's semicircular, it doesn't conflict. It's not the design of the menorah. Especially those who used to worship their Avodah Zarah, they wanted to imitate the Beis Hamikdash. That makes sense. This is the explanation why they added to the design of the menorah that darkened the dragon, which is a Avodah Zarah, because these were the Avodah Zarah who were doing this. So, because of the importance of the Beis Hamikdash, the service of the Beis Hamikdash, they wanted to utilize it for their Avodah Zarah. So they copied aspects of it, but they added this draken. Und Leut einer von solche menorahs, and one of those menorahs that they worshipped and that they imitated parts of the Beis Hamikdash, hat man gemacht dem Ziur menorah lashar. That's how they designed the shape of the menorah that was on the gate, but it has nothing to do with the real gate with the menorah of the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore there's no conflict to what we know. The halach is that it's straight, and the fact by the Shara Nitzochen of Titus is different doesn't prove anything. It's not the same menorah. And now the Rebbe takes the same thing is the Meiri who rules like the Rambam, even though there's a clear testimony of Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi, the Meiri says that testimony doesn't mean anything, because what Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi saw doesn't necessarily mean that he saw that of the Beis Hamikdash. Yeah, but wait a minute. Over here it's easy to say because it's on this title, but it's Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi saying it. So the Rebbe explains. Similar we can say in our case. As far as the Tzitz, according to the view of the Meiri. Even though Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi saw a Tzitz in Rome, the question was on the Meiri said, how could the Chachamim ignore that? He saw a Tzitz in Rome. Doesn't mean anything. He says, aber nit kein Raya Berura, that is not absolute evidence. Ados is given der Tzitz shel Kohen Gadol. We don't have an absolute evidence that this was the Kohen Gadol Tzitz. As Ken Zayin, It's possible. That this had been some sort of an ornament, a jewelry, was immer gemacht in a Ziur, somebody made in a shape, was his ksad mit some tzitz, which was a little bit similar to the tzitz. It doesn't mean that it was the tzitz itself. Dennoch is od der Tachshit verlegt geworden. And then that Tachshit was put away, the non-real tzitz of the Mikdash. But that imitation of the tzitz of the Mikdash was put away. Now, it was put away together with the other vessels of the Beis HaMikdash. So, Rebbe said there's a lot of possibility. Rebbe suggests, Me'eza Siba Shatia, for whatever reason, they put it together with the rest of the jewelries or the rest of the garments and the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Rebbe gives, you want to know a scenario? I'll tell you why. The Mesorah tzitz, maybe they wanted to save the real tzitz from the Romans, so they snuck in a imitation tzitz. And the Rebbe says, this suggestion the Rebbe is giving that maybe they did it in order to be able to salvage the actual menorah by giving another one. We can say that by the menorah too. And that's why it was together, zusammen, with the Klei HaMikdash, was an gelegen Reimi, together with the vessels of the Mikdash, which were in Rome. So the fact that they saw them there doesn't mean that this was actually there. Maybe somebody imitated and they put it in there and actually to put it to sneak out. And the Rebbe says, halachically, the Rebbe says there would be no prohibition against making an imitation tzitz, because some kelim we find you're not allowed to imitate it, but the tzitz, the Rebbe argues halachically, it may not be an isur, and even if there was an isur, maybe a non-Jew made it. There's a lot of ways to explain how something was there but wasn't the real thing. Or befrat, the Rebbe says especially we can say, with regards to the garment, with regards to the menorah, making an image of it would be a prohibition. But the garments is questionable. Befrat, as of the big kahuna, gefindt man in dem Isur von Loisasun iti. You don't find the prohibition, don't make, besides Hashem, to make a structure which meets the image of the Beis HaMikdash. The Rebbe is meglach, therefore it's possible, as einer for sich gemacht hat Tachshit. Somebody could make for themselves such an ornament, but it's endlich some tzitz, which is similar to the tzitz. So, very possible somebody made that, and somebody who had that. Even if you're going to argue that this includes the Isur, the Rebbe in the note here brings down whether the Big Tekun or Kleshoris are they part of the Isur. So even if a Yid is not allowed to make an imitation of the Tzitz because of the Big Tekun, it's a Kleshoris. Maybe a non-Jew copied it. So, therefore, it's not a proof from Rabbi Elazar that from what he saw. Since the Chacham had a tradition, Beloshen Hamiri, to use the language that the Mir says, Yodua Etzlam, they knew as the Verter Kodesh LaHashem Zayne Given Gishrim Bebeis Sichos. They knew it was written with two lines. That was their tradition. Is a dover borer is a given the mitzvah. So there is no question. This was the fact. Und die Kabbalah Gufa is machrich zu sagen, And because they had such a tradition, that forces us. Because of, if there was no tradition, okay, we should not maybe say, oh, what we're seeing is not the real one. But because they had a tradition, that forces to say, "Ados was Rabbi Elazar but Rabbi Yisod gesehen in Rome." That which Rabbi Elazar but Rabbi Yisod saw in Rome is not given the tzitz of Kohen Gadol. That was not the tzitz of the Kohen Gadol. On the other hand, that's why we go like the Chacham. That's what the Chacham ruled that they didn't care. They didn't retract. They didn't care what Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi saw that didn't fit their tradition. So they answered it. What he saw was something else. He didn't see the real tzitz. So how come Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi took this as evidence? When you don't have a tradition that this is the way it was written, like by the Chachamim, so then if you see it, you don't have to stretch it that this is not the real tzitz, but he's going to assume that is the real tzitz. By Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi Atzmei, but Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi himself was hot nit gehad die Kabbalah von sein Rebbe. He did not have it tradition from his teacher. His b'shas hot gesehen dem tzitz beremi. When he saw the tzitz in Rome, is nit mechuyev zu annehmen as a weite Möglichkeit. He is not obligated to accept such a distant possibility as zwischen Klei HaMikdash, that between the vessel of the Mikdash hat sich hereingemischt that Tzitz from Bachutz, got mixed in a Tzitz from the outside, not the real Tzitz. The Emerson Tzitz hat man nicht mit Zeir gewähnt, that the real tzitz they did not shape. B'amatzur is das nicht der tzitz shel Kohen Gadol, and that which he did see the design, that's not really the Kohen Gadol. Nor a tachshiv das jemand hat gemacht. This is be an ornament that jewelry somebody else made. That doesn't have to accept that. Und anders von dem tzitz, and that was done different than the tzitz. On the Rebbe, so to him, because if it does not conflict the tradition, it's not something that we have to say this far away logic that somebody mixed it in and he designed it, not exactly the same, it got mixed in, and this is not really the Kohen Gadol's tzitz. Und der Rebbe can davon bringen a Reihe. So to him, he can bring a proof. Kosuv Olav Kodesh Lashem B'Shita Achas. It was written Kodesh Hashem one because this is the way I saw it, and that's probably what it was in him. But the Chachamim who had a tradition, the fact that you saw it must mean that you didn't see the real tzitz. B'Baldover as the Chachamim Yagahat Azakabala, they did have such a tradition. Is loyok chisha sayidu etzlom abeidus riyah. That's why, as the Meiri says, it did not contradict. That's what they knew by them, even though this he saw, but it doesn't diminish, it doesn't take away from what they know. Then what he saw was not the right thing. But in their Kabbalah is the Chachkin Sofik. Tradition, there is no doubt that's the way it was, that in Mashenkim and Egei, the Eidus Riyah. But when you have this testimony that you saw, Kemen Zogen, over there it's possible to say, das is nicht given the tzitz of the Kohen Gadol canal, that this was not the tzitz of the Kohen Gadol, like I said before. So to the Chachamim, if by tradition this is the way it was, so there's no question of that. You see it. It has to be another tzitz, not the Kohen Gadol tzitz, so that's why it doesn't change anything. But according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi, who did not have this tradition, he has to accept it because he doesn't have to assume that there was another tzitz mixed in over here, which was a little bit farther away. Only because the Chachamim had this tradition, they can't change the tradition by the fact, because that means what you're seeing is not the right thing. But according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi, assuming that what I see is the right thing, because he doesn't have a tradition to conflict with it. So, if we are saying that, explaining the Meiri, that what you saw doesn't conflict, So why does the Rambam paskin b'diavad like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi? Why doesn't the Rambam, as the Rebbe explained here now, what he saw is not necessarily as the Meiri explains. So why would the Rambam say, but the evidence is kosher because Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi saw? Why are we impressed with what Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi saw? He maybe saw something, but he didn't see the real tzitz over there. So how could we say that with the evidence it's okay just because he saw it? We see that Rambam does take that. Api hanal dal. Based on the above, is doch tzorich in godlicheit psag din Rambam. We need to very much understand the ruling of the Rambam. Ubefrat dem inyan von Hoben b'migdosh b'poil, and especially that we're saying that in the Migdosh, actually, what he saw was true, and there was a b'di'evet tzitz ameshach zman kinal, that there was for a period of time, there was only a tzitz which was b'di'evet, which is not the lechatchila, as the Rambam says, the halach is like the chacham. So the Rebbe explains it by introducing. Wie hat man gekannt abnarren der Remayim? How could we trick? The Rebbe says maybe they snuck in that tzitz. It wasn't the real tzitz. How could you actually trick the Romans? The tzitz was kemel is nit gewend dugmos be Migdash by making a tzitz which was never been done in the Migdash. Seems a little bit difficult. Befrat loit hayedu di beschreibung euch bisifreim, especially as it's known the way this thing was described, even in the books of the Romans, from Prote Beis Hamikdash Avedus Chulu, they have the details of the Beis Hamikdash and the services, so they knew God's good. They knew very well. And that's what we have to say. As is the Rambam Muchrich Lefarish. That's what the Rambam is forced to explain. As b'diavad kosher, that b'diavad is kosher was his given azay bepoil. That there was actually that way, at least for a short period of time, because it's really not logical that we were able to trick the Romans with the wrong one. And the Rebbe says, so therefore, the Rambam still wants paskins like that, that b'diavad is okay. B'yaseirim is a kosev Chaim. And the Rebbe Chaim writes even more than this. As afilu l'tanakama de chachomim, even according to the Chachomim, einei ma'akef. It does not hold back. So he learns it's not only because it holds back, like the Kesef Mishnah says, because of the testimony of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi, but the Rebbe Chaim says that even according to the Tanakam, the Chachomim, einei ma'akef. It doesn't hold back. Says therefore, it should not be difficult to you. The Rambam rules in the 9th Perek Mikdash, as we just quoted, that b'diavad is okay. So that b'diavad is okay, not like the Kesef Mishnah said before, because of the testimony of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi, but because the Chachomim himself. The Rebbe says we can say at least another reason for the ruling of the Rambam. Maybe this is the main reason, the Rebbe says. Not to make increased disagreement, which means that the Chachomim is no good, and according to the blood is good, to streamline, to make it less machlekes, ubefrat as lefi ha'meiri kipshuton is a machlekes b'metzias, and especially according to the Meiri, literally there is machlekes. According to the Chachomim, they didn't accept it. They said no, it wasn't there. It is not makrish the metzias. their Kabbalah, so according to the Chachamim, it was in one line. It was in two lines, and according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Elazar, there's a factual difference. So the Rebbe wants to explain according to Rabbi Chaim that with the evidence it's okay, even according to the Chacham. And then we don't have to come on to this distinction as Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov would need gehad di Kabbalah anal v'chulu, because he didn't have, so to him this was a vision, like we said before. Because in this case, it's not that we're ignoring Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov and why he ruled differently over here. We're just saying that the Chachamim also allow it in such a case. It's not me'akiv, and therefore it could be done. This doesn't mean b'di'evet because we're going to rule like Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yosef. We don't have to explain why Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yosef rules differently. But it's just because it fits even with the Chacham. But here the Rebbe wants to bring out a rule. Don't get too excited when you see something as if it contradicts what we know. For all the above, we also see a lesson for our days. Lately, there were revealed certain hidden scrolls from Megillah, Minyona Tanakh, different scrolls from matters of the Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim. Und dorten seine Fragen kamen Shinuyim, and those discovered, there are several changes legaber unser Mesorah, as it pertains to our tradition, which are written in a way of less a choser or extra, what is above, without above, different words in the Torah in Tanakh. Darf man wissen. So we need to know from here. As the Genizes, these hidden, material that they found, they appear to be a testimony. You see, this is quite, how can you challenge that? They are entirely not like our tradition. Especially, you can't really know who are the authors of these hidden scrolls. Whether it's the great sages or not, at least by Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yosef, we know it's Gedei Chachamim, but here we don't even know who exactly wrote them. But still, Nochmer Esken Gorzain, it's actually possible that that's an enigmas geworden, that the reason why they were put away and they were hidden, had the Megillas and Enigmas taka the far. It was actually for that reason, because because they were written not according to halacha. So it could be many reasons, but that's is in question. What you see is not necessarily mashenkin the Mesorah v'smirhom, as opposed to the tradition that we have. This was passed along a person to the other person, generation after generation, lemailo, going up ad Moshe Rabbeinu to Moshe Rabbeinu, is a davar barer as the emes that is clear, and this is absolutely certain that is true. This is Sichos Shabbos Parshas Tetzaveh Tovshin Mem Gimel.